The Accelerator is a tower that requires no introduction. It's a tower that's been in the game ever since the Great Overhaul update, and it's an update that I will probably always remember. Back when it was released, it was seen as a very strong tower, probably the second best tower in the entire game, only behind the Mecha Base, which was purchasable back then for gems. Eventually, Mecha Base would cease to be purchasable, and Accelerator was the only gem tower. Later, a lineup was discovered, consisting of Accelerator, Golden Minigunner, DJ, Commander, and Farm. It could allow any player to solo any map in the entire game on Fallen mode, including the original Badlands, or the remake of it. Bottom line, back then, it was arguably the single strongest DPS tower in the game. So how did Paradoxum tackle this power level? Well, I agree with the approach they took. Over the years, instead of bringing the tower down a notch, they instead released new towers and buffed old towers to be at his power level, until he isn't uniquely overpowered. Well, along with actual Accelerator nerfs and reworks. That brings us to a little before today. Accelerator has been this odd tower, where the entire community recognized it as being strong, yet also just mid. It was in this position of being the baseline strong tower that every other tower needed to compare to in order to be considered strong, but it itself wasn't ever anyone's go-to choice. Many polls were done in the community feedback channel on the Discord server, and Accelerator was consistently voted to be a little underpowered. Is this the case? Well, I never really thought so personally. I certainly didn't use it over the competition though, but when playing with friends, I'd always ask one person to have Accelerator in our party, just because everybody else can bring splash damage, and in that case, Accelerator's purpose could be to assist in eliminating single big threats. It was one of the options to do this, and it always felt like it was a valid one. Recently, Accelerator got a pretty big change. The most interesting of which is that the laser now deals 1000 damage per second, but can only do this for around 2.4 seconds, before resting for 4 more seconds. Right now, the community is yelling about this bringing Accelerator back to its former glory. Is this the case? How overpowered is the Accelerator? Okay, to understand the position Accelerator is in right now, we need to discuss his average expected DPS. I ran my own tests and checks, and discovered that Accelerator deals 2,400 damage across 6.9 seconds. This can further be broken down into 2.77 seconds to deal 2,400 damage, followed by a 4.13 second rest period where it deals 0 damage. What does this explicitly mean? Well, Accelerator averages to around 348 DPS, which makes it okay at least. This puts Accelerator only 50 DPS short of Engineer, which is balanced around being a stronger tower than the rest while being practically unbuffable. Keep in mind, you can, excluding Hacker Jank, place 2 additional Accelerators compared to Engineer, making Accelerator output higher single target DPS than Engineer. Granted, Engineer has partial splash damage, can be used easier in the early game, is more consistent with targeting, and is mostly stun immune, but you can't deny that this level of damage from up to 8 Accelerators is insanely high. This is pretty solid, but this isn't what the player base is so riled up about right now. One more aspect about Accelerator that needs to be understood is a gimmick that's exclusive to his own attack cycle. While not necessarily, as Engineer takes pauses every minute to build a sentry, Gatling and Pursuit gotta reload, etc. What I'm getting at here is that Accelerator's reload mechanic makes it unique. Think about it this way. Instead of dealing 2,400 damage across 6.9 seconds, as I said before, think of it as 2.77 seconds to deal 2,400 damage, followed by 4.13 seconds of dealing 0 damage. When you do this, the expected DPS gets very interesting. Think of it this way. Suppose that the blast of 2,400 damage successfully kills all threatening targets in his range. To clarify, a threatening target includes an enemy that must be answered immediately because they have consequences to be left alive that may be difficult to handle, like Necromancers on Wave 19 with the healing ability, or the Possessed Armor with its immense tanky speed. This excludes enemies that are only present to give you money, as any other tower will kill them in the crossfire. In this case, Accelerator will have dealt 2,400 damage in 2.77 seconds, ignoring the 4.13 second rest period, because, when you think about it, you can pretend that there's no enemies in its range. After all, you aren't missing out on damage if there's no enemies to damage. In this case, Accelerator will have dealt almost 1,000 successful damage per second, which is beyond unmatched. And this becomes very likely. Remember, Accelerator has an 8 placement limit, again excluding Hacker Jank. This deals a combined burst of 19,200 damage. If this 40% of a literal nuke's damage across 2.77 seconds kills the target, which is very likely until super beefy enemies, they'll have successfully dealt almost 1,000 DPS each. This is beyond unmatched, as 8 towers dealing 8,000 combined DPS is absurd. This gets even crazier in co-op, as when more people bring Accelerator, the probability of the enemies surviving the blast goes down, and if no enemies survive, the average DPS goes through the roof. This sounds like nothing but amazing. Everything about this sounds beyond overpowered. A 20% price increase does not justify this insane potential. But is it always going to perform this well? No, not at all. There's a pretty big caveat to all this, and it's equally important to understand in order to fully get this tower's expected DPS. While mathematically, it is true that Accelerator will almost always deal higher damage over time than his expected DPS suggests, it will be a rare occurrence for it to matter. There are many reasons for why his burst damage may fail to eliminate threats. The first reason is that it is really hard to build accelerators faster than the enemy's scale in HP. It is extremely difficult, or outright impossible to place max level accelerators fast enough for the burst damage to wipe out all HP required unless you use powers early on. A second reason is that in single player, there is a hard maximum on how much damage this burst can do. Without Hacker, it's only 19,200, as said earlier. There are many enemies that appear with health pools that exceed this blast, like the Molten Executioner, Hollow Guard, Fallen Guardian, all bosses aside from Brute, and many more. When you inevitably reach these roadblocks, you're stuck with utilizing Accelerator's base 348 DPS each, which is still average at worst, but it immediately becomes pretty bad when buffs are accounted for. If Accelerator is buffed to the maximum 40% damage from Mercenary Base and DJ, and 50% attack speed from Commander, you'd expect his DPS to shoot far higher than before. But this isn't the case, at all. Because no matter what, no matter how much damage per second Accelerator's beam deals, it's always going to max out at around 2,400 damage. Then we'll be thrown into a 4.13 second rest period. No buff in the game will eliminate this resting period, no matter what you try. This means that with all buffs in the game, Accelerator's average DPS rises from 348 to 447 DPS. It only goes up by 99. This is even crazier with powers, as a fully buffed Accelerator with all powers rises from 447 to a measly 487. 40 more. And this makes perfect sense, actually. Again, going back to before, 2.77 seconds to deal 2,400 damage, followed by a 4.13 second recharge time. What buffs do is shrink the 2.77 seconds down to 0.77 seconds, but doesn't change the 4.13 second rest period at all. This means that the difference between regular Accelerator and buff plus power boosted Accelerator is a small 2 seconds out of 6.9. This lands Accelerator among the worst DPS towers to buff, as the buffs you get in practice are significantly smaller than the expected plus 40% damage and plus 50% attack speed. He's only buffed by around 30% total with all powers. And I believe that this is what the rework tried to tackle. Buffed Accelerator was always an amazing tower, even if the community recognized it or not. Making the Accelerator spend about 66% of his attack time recharging, unbuffed, makes him super unsynergetic with buffs. To put it into perspective, Accelerator will never pass Engineer in any category: base DPS, buff DPS, and powers plus buff DPS. This says a lot, as again, sentries can't be buffed. What does all of this mean? Well, it's for you to decide. Accelerator right now is in this position where it's both an overpowered tower and an underpowered tower. and I think it's really cool. Personally, I wish that there were more towers like this. This tower makes its strengths apparent, while also keeping its weaknesses in check. Accelerator still isn't hands down the best tower, but it's got some strengths that gives it insane potential to put it in the discussion for the best tower. Do its strengths outweigh its weaknesses, or are the weaknesses of not being stun immune and being just okay when buffed make it remain as just solid? I don't think there's an exact answer for this, and it's for each of us to decide. No matter what the conclusion is, Accelerator's a pretty interesting tower that has gone through many stages throughout the game's history. It has always been a fun tower to use, and I believe it right now to be a super healthy tower. At the end of the day, this is a game. Games are meant to be fun, and I think this tower is one of the best towers just for that reason alone.